Yeah, thank you very much, Dilhara. So, typically we have monthly retreat at Kalalgoda. So, due to this coronavirus situation, we couldn't conduct it. So, as a supplement, we are now trying to conduct a Dhamma sermon, and I welcome all of you. So, may you give your consent by saying Sadhu Sadhu. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Sukhaya bhikkhave vedanaya raganusayo pahatabbo. Dukkhaya vedanaya patighanusayo pahatabbo. Adukkama sukhaya vedanaya avijjanusayo pahatabbo-ti. Dear Dhamma friends, today I have selected the topic from Vedana Sangyutta, that is in Sangyutta Nikaya, and this sutta is called Pahana Sutta, which is dealing with abandonment or giving up. So the sutta actually starts where Buddha telling about three types of feelings, three types of feeling tones. So as you all know, according to Buddha's teaching, there are three types of feelings. First one is the Sukha Vedana, that is the pleasant feelings or pleasurable feelings. The other one, painful feelings, Dukkha Vedana. The third one is neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling or Upekha Vedana. Adukkama Sukha Vedana. So this is one way of categorization where Buddha explaining that these three types of feelings are available. Actually, these are constantly changing. Sometimes in the morning we may have many, say, pleasurable feelings, happy feelings, but maybe in the evening we might have painful feelings. And the majority of feelings are actually neither painful nor pleasant feelings, that they are the neutral feelings, the upekha. But we typically ignore them. We don't appreciate those neutral feelings, but we constantly going after happy feelings, pleasurable feelings. So this is the typical nature as human beings or as any being. They constantly going after, following after pleasurable feelings and trying to run away from painful feelings, and we are quite ignorant to the neutral feelings. So this is the typical spectrum of how we are dealing with feelings. As you know, Buddha recommends feeling as a way of establishing mindfulness. There are four types of establishing mindfulness Buddha recommends: related to the body, Kaya Anupassana; related to the feelings, Vedana Anupassana; related to the mind, that is the Chitta-anupassana; and related to various phenomena, that is Dhamma-anupassana. So among these four, the second one is related to the feelings. So it might be a little difficult immediately for one to deal with feelings, because you might need some amount of perseverance, some amount of patience, as well as some developed mindfulness to deal with feelings, because sometimes it is difficult to step back and look at feelings as feelings. Say for example, if you do walking meditation, when your left foot is touching the ground, and suppose you feel some sort of hardness, some sort of stiffness, maybe some coolness, still you might be able to understand that. You can simply look at it like an observer, like a third person. That kind of a phenomena, that kind of a element characteristics can be visible, can be possible to observe as a third person. Similarly, suppose when you are observing breath, in breath, out breath, and maybe coolness of the in breath, maybe warmness of the out breath, so you will be able to observe these things like an outsider. So this is kind of an entry point. This is the kind of bare attention where various element characteristics are there, we are trying to recognize them. So at the beginning we have some conceptual understanding like in-breath and out-breath, but later as our concentration develops and mindfulness sharpens, we would be able to recognize not as in-breath and out-breath, but with some more detail, more element characteristics. Maybe like movement of the breath, maybe like warmth or coolness, maybe kind of touch sensation. So likewise, we are going more deeper or more subtle levels and would be able to understand these subtle characteristics. So that we call the element characteristics. Now these are actually direct experience. We don't need to look at a book, or we don't need to ask from someone, or we don't need to even think about these things. We can directly know these things, directly feel these things, directly understand these things, directly recognize these things. So this is how we establish mindfulness. Suppose when you are feeling in-breath and out-breath, and once you reach, say, cooler in-breath and maybe warmer out-breath, so that indicates that you are able to refine your mindfulness and you are able to understand the element characteristics. At the same time, you can look at it in a different angle, different point of view. That is the feeling tone. Say, for example, if you think, or if according to your understanding, at that time, suppose the in-breath is giving you some amount of pleasant feeling, and maybe out-breath is giving you some amount of a neutral feeling. I'm just giving an example. At that time, rather than looking at the element characteristics, you can understand, or you can look at it according to the feeling tone. That is, from at the level of in-breath, you have a pleasant feeling, and during the out-breath, you have a neutral feeling. So at that time, actually the same process is going on, some kind of a physical process is happening, but now you are recognizing the feeling tone. That is the pleasant feeling as well as the neutral feeling. Similarly, suppose you are observing rising and falling of the abdomen. So simply rising and falling, maybe at the beginning it's in the conceptual level. As your mindfulness refines, sharpens, you would be able to understand now kind of a movement happens, and there may be many movements, not just a single movement. And during the rising cycle, there are series of movements, as well as during the falling cycle, there may be a series of movements. Similarly, there may be kind of stiffness, hardness. Likewise, there are various kinds of element characteristics. But all these element characteristics, rather than looking at it in that angle, probably you may be able to understand according to the feeling tone. Most probably they are neutral feelings. And sometimes assume that during the rising cycle you may feel kind of a neutral feeling, and during the falling cycle probably you can feel some kind of a pleasant feeling. So at that time we don't give emphasis to the element characteristics. Instead we are giving emphasis to the feeling tone. So likewise, these Kayanupassana and Vedananupassana are very close. One can deal with Kayanupassana and introduce mindfulness, sharpen mindfulness, and refine mindfulness. And with that refined mindfulness, now you can look at this process in a different angle, and that is according to the feeling tone. So other than that, suppose when you see someone, if he is a kind of your loved one, or maybe your friend, then there's a kind of a pleasant feeling arising in ourselves. And if you see someone whom you don't like to see, then there could be a kind of a resistance arising in ourselves, kind of an unpleasant feeling, unhappy feeling arising in ourselves. So all this, if we are mindful, we can recognize. Typically what happens is, when we come across, or when we meet someone we like, immediately the pleasant feeling arises, and rather than we recognize that pleasant feeling as pleasant feeling, we immediately go beyond that and we attribute it, telling that, okay, this is my son, this is my daughter, this is my father, this is my brother. Likewise, we introduce different personalities, and we get on to some kind of a proliferation. Our mind has gone to more conceptual levels rather than stopping at the feeling level or even to the recognition level. So going to this feeling level is in a way kind of a yoniso manasikara, going to the bottom, going to the source of this whole procedure. Typically, as I said, when pleasant feeling arises, we don't stop there. We quickly jump to the next aspects. So this process actually beautifully explained in Madhupindika Sutta of Majjhima Nikaya, where the whole element level process is explained. Chakkuncha paticca rupecha uppajjati chakku viññāna. That is means when form and the eye comes together, then there's a eye consciousness arise. All together, all these three are called the eye contact, and as a result of eye contact, then the feeling arise, and we then recognize this feeling, that is the perception. And on top of this perception, we sort of start thinking. We introduce a thought, and then we introduce another thought, then we introduce another thought. So likewise, we sort of start this thinking machine. Actually, at the beginning, the process is very much like a cause and effect relationship. And then later we take the control to our hand. That is how we start to think. And ultimately, the thinking happens by itself. The thinking machine is now started, and it does not need our help. It has its own momentum, and now it is going on and on. Now we are in a big story. We are in a kind of a big inner chatter, or even we have gone to the kind of level of obsession. At that time, we are like helpless, and we are now being carried away by this whole thinking process, proliferation or rumination. So this is how typically untrained mind works. On the other hand, if we are able to recognize this whole process, we would be able to go a little deeper and go to the source, and that is what we call yoniso manasikara. Rather than we become a helpless victim to this thinking process, this rumination, this proliferation, we would be able to recognize this process at its inception level, at its starting levels. So this is where we need mindfulness. This is where we need practice, meditation. Because untrained mind is not capable of understanding these initial processes. They are very subtle. They are very instant, happens very quickly. And typically we end up with completely in ignorance and completely in the rumination, proliferation. But after introducing mindfulness only, we would be able to understand these initial steps. So this is how typically when a pleasant feeling arises, we end up with some kind of a very pleasant story. And as a result, we develop the raga anusaya, the tendency towards the lust. Some kind of a latent tendency or kind of a underlying tendency towards the lust. Because we have some kind of an attachment. So once there's a pleasant feeling arise, we don't stop there. We add to that. We start attributing various signs to that. Taking nimitti, taking various signs, past memories, and we add various likes and dislikes to it, and we come up with a big story. We end up with a big movie, and we are then acting in that movie. We are actually the directors of this movie, and ultimately we are also inside the movie, and ultimately we become a victim of this whole movie. So this is the typical nature of how we deal with the pleasant feelings. Similarly to the unpleasant feeling or the painful feelings. Because when painful feeling arise, we start to go away from that. We try to run away from that. And as a result, we start to think about it. When there's a painful feeling arise, we understand that, and we understand according to our various perceptions, various signs, previous habits, and as a result we start to think, and again we add another thought, again we add another thought. So likewise again we introduce various thoughts and we start this thinking machine, like we did it in the pleasant feeling. Here also in the painful feeling, we start some sort of a series of painful thoughts, and we start another kind of a story. Then we might be thinking about that person, or something bad he did to me, something bad he did to my children, or my say parents, or my relatives, or whatever. So likewise we attribute various other sides and various other side tracks to this story, and we are sort of encouraging this whole proliferation, and ultimately we are in a kind of a very sorrowful and kind of a painful situation, and ultimately we get obsessed with this kind of ongoing thinking process, and even one can become depressed because of this too much thinking, and we could be even extremely unhappy and extremely angry about the situation. So these are the difficult or different areas how our thinking can go on, not understanding the initial process, how it has started. We never go to the source, rather we end up in contributing more and more, adding more and more to this ongoing thinking process, and ultimately we become a kind of a helpless victim of this whole thinking process. So as a result of pleasurable feelings, when we start a big thinking and kind of a story, then we are promoting raga anusaya, the latent tendency towards the lust, kind of an attachment, kind of a desire. So this is the kind of underlying tendency we all have, and we are promoting it. We become a kind of a victim of that whole process, and we are further and further strengthening that underlying tendency. On the other hand, related to the painful feelings, when we start kind of a different painful story, kind of an angry story, kind of a ongoing unpleasant story in the mind, we are adding more and more pain towards that and kind of an aversion towards that, and that is where the underlying tendency of aversion, what we call as patigahanusaya, underlying tendency towards aversion or resistance, is being strengthened. So you can understand when we are unmindful, so we are actually promoting any of these two. When we go through some pleasant feelings, pleasurable feelings, we are strengthening the lustful thoughts, we are strengthening the attachment, we are strengthening desires, we are strengthening these underlying tendencies. On the other hand, when we come across some painful feelings, we start another different type of story, and we go through kind of aversion and resentment, unpleasant feelings, resistance and all. And as a result, we are introducing, or we are strengthening this patigahanusaya, that is the resistance and aversion tendencies. So this is how we react to typical even sense stimuli. When we see something, when we hear something, when we sense something, when we taste something, or every time we are actually strengthening these kind of latent tendencies. On the other hand, the neutral feelings are we are actually quite ignorant to neutral feelings, so we simply ignore them. We try to get rid of them and we simply ignore them, and as a result we are not being awakened, we are not being aware of even the neutral feelings. So as a result we are enhancing or strengthening the ignorance, that is the avijjanusaya, that is the latent tendency towards the ignorance. So likewise you can understand. So now Buddha is giving us some sort of a picture how the typical worldly being is using his day-to-day feelings for more and more strengthening of his underlying tendencies. Every day we may come across some happy feelings as well as painful feelings as well as neutral feelings. when we go through them, constantly we are strengthening our latent tendencies as well. So this is in a way kind of a bad situation, kind of a vicious cycle, because when we go through some pleasant feelings, pleasurable feelings, we are further strengthening our desires. On the other hand, when we go through some unpleasant feelings, painful feelings, we are further strengthening our aversion, our resentment, kind of resistance. And again, when we are going through some neutral feelings, we are strengthening ignorance. So this is kind of a very vicious cycle. So therefore, in this Pahana Sutta, in Vedana Sangyutta, so Buddha is telling us, Sukhaya bhikkhave vedanaya raganusayo pahatabbu. So monks, related to these pleasant feelings, pleasurable feelings, you have to abandon, you have to give up this tendency towards the lust, tendency towards the attachment, tendency towards the desire. So, and on the other hand, Dukkhaya Vedanaya Patigahanusayo Pahatabbu. Buddha says, when related to the unpleasant feelings, painful feelings, you got to avoid, or you got to give up the latent tendency towards the resistance, towards the aversion. And again he says, Adukkama Sukhaya Vedanaya Avijjanusayo Pahatabbu. When related to the neutral feelings, you got to give up, abandon the latent tendencies towards the ignorance. So this is kind of an advice he is giving. So how can we do this? So advice is something, but how can we implement this practically? So that is what quite important as meditators, as practitioners. So when we are dealing with Vedananupassana, so this is the kind of area we are kind of going through some sort of a training. So when we go through some pleasant feelings, rather than we take it me or mine, then we take it as simply as a pleasant feelings, pleasurable feelings. It's very much like coming out of the pleasurable feeling and looking at it objectively. Rather than we take it as me or mine, we should be able to recognize this pleasurable feeling as pleasurable feeling. So this is the key point. So typically, as I mentioned previously, as I explained previously, we go through this pleasant feeling and end up with a huge story, huge proliferation, kind of an obsession. But the yogi has to understand the pleasant feeling as pleasant feeling, pleasurable feeling as pleasurable feeling. So this is quite important. And on the other hand, when one go through painful feeling, similarly he should be able to understand painful feeling as painful feeling. Suppose you are sitting cross-legged and you are simply observing your body, observing your posture. At that time, suppose there's a pain arising in your knee. So rather than you blame to that knee, or you blame to yourself, or blame others, or start talking about it, start thinking about it, start rumination about it. So rather than doing such stupid thing, we should be able to keep our attention at the knee and should be able to recognize this painful feeling as painful feeling. So this is the kind of a decision point. This is actually the change. This is the decision point happens in our life. So when pain arises at the knee, rather than accusing someone or rather than accusing yourself, we should be able to recognize painful feeling as painful feeling. Even it can grow as a result of this observation, even it can grow, doesn't matter. But this painful feeling is in a way the raw material for our meditation. For Vedananupassana, this painful feeling is the raw material. Similarly, the pleasurable feelings are the raw material. Suppose there's another irritation happens in the leg, or kind of a numbness happen in the leg, or any kind of painful feeling arise, any area in the body, we should be able to keep our attention at that area, should be able to recognize this painful feeling as painful feeling. Similarly, suppose you are experiencing many neutral feelings. Say you are able to recognize rising and falling. As I explained, rising and falling is simply a neutral feeling, mostly. So we should be able to recognize this neutral feeling, rising and falling. Instead of looking at it in the element characteristics, we can look at its feeling tone, and now it is actually a neutral feeling. Maybe even anapanasati, in breath and out breath, that also very much a neutral feeling. And there may be various other neutral feelings arising throughout the body, and then and there we should be able to recognize all these feeling tones, all these neutral feelings. So this is how we are actually stepping into Vedananupassana. So Buddha actually does not stop there. Buddha asks us to see even the worldly feelings as well as the unworldly feelings. While meditating, there are situations we may go through some pleasant feelings because of the concentrated mind. There may be some blissful states arising. We may go through some very pleasant experiences, and our body might appear very light, and we may have some very blissful and tranquil experiences, and all these are actually pleasant experiences, pleasant feelings. So instead of taking them as me or mine, so Buddha is asking us to look at them as feelings. Piti patisangvedi, sukha patisangvedi. So likewise Buddha is explaining, so while going through all these very pleasant experiences, we should be able to recognize them as various pleasant feelings, happy feelings, pleasurable feelings, rather than taking them personally, looking at them objectively. On the other hand, when we are going through some unpleasant feelings, similarly, we should be able to recognize them as unpleasant feelings without taking them me or mine, without taking them personally. So this is quite important. And so when we go through these pleasant experiences, blissful experiences, especially through meditation, they are typically called niramisa vedana, where it is not related to the eye, it is not related to the body, it is not related to the tongue or nose or ears. So they are actually born because of our practice, because of the concentrated mind. So they are in a way beyond the typical sensual stimuli. So therefore they are called unworldly kind of feelings, niramisa vedana. So we should be able to recognize them as niramisa vedana, unworldly kind of feelings. On the other hand, suppose you are on your walking path, probably you have seen something, and as a result there may be a pleasant feeling arising. At that time actually the kind of a sense stimulation has happened. As a result the pleasant feeling has arisen. So we should be able to recognize that as a worldly pleasurable feeling. So likewise we should be able to now categorize how this worldly type of feelings and how unworldly kind of feelings arise. So Buddha in a way refines our understanding. Buddha is increasing our clear comprehension, sampajanya, as a result of this process. So, and on the other hand, now I have explained that the typically pleasurable feelings are involved with the latent tendency towards the lust. But the beauty is these pleasant feelings, which are born because of our practice, because of our concentrated mind, they do not contribute towards the lust. So that is one interesting finding, and therefore we should not be afraid of going through these kind of pleasant feelings, blissful experiences. We should not be afraid thinking that these also may contribute towards the latent tendency towards lust. It is not. It is very clearly mentioned in the Chulavedalla Sutta by Arihat Therani Dhammadinna, where even though these typical sensual pleasures are contributing towards the underlying tendency of lust, these unworldly kind of pleasant experiences. Niramisa Vedana does not contribute towards the latent tendency towards lust. So that is quite interesting. Similarly, we may go through some painful feelings which may contribute towards the latent tendency towards the aversion. But on the other hand, while because of our going through our practice, there also could be some unpleasant feelings. Some example is that say you might be thinking about someone else's practice and comparing your practice. As a result, there could be a little bit of unrest or kind of a resistance might arise in our mind. Say for example, we might have heard, okay, someone has gone through some very good experience, he or she has improved in his meditation. So we might comparing his or her experience according to and with our experience, and we assume that we found that we are not yet reached that level. So there could be a little unpleasant feeling arising in our mind. This is not kind of a jealousy, but kind of a thinking that when am I going to experience that kind of a unworldly type of experience. It is not asking some pleasure using eyes, ears, tongue, nose, body, etc. Rather, this is kind of a pleasant experience expecting through the practice by giving up. So therefore, this kind of painful experience, Venerable Dhammadinna is mentioning, does not contribute latent tendency towards the aversion, because it is not born up because of the sense stimuli. Rather, it is kind of a unsatisfaction arisen because of our practice. So this is also possible, and therefore we have to understand that the practice related or dhamma related any kind of pleasure or pain or unpleasant feeling does not contribute towards the latent tendencies. Therefore, we should not misunderstand thinking that we should never go through some blissful experiences, or we should never go through some kind of unpleasant experiences while during our practice. It is not. Even we go through them, then they may not contribute towards these latent tendencies. And now when one understanding different types of these feelings more and more, we should be able to understand their behavior. They arise and they appear for a while and then they pass away. Then another place they arise and appear for a while and then pass away. So likewise, there's a kind of an impermanent nature towards these different types of feelings. So therefore, Buddha mentions when different kinds of feelings are arising, we can see this impermanent nature. Tasu vedanasu aniccanupassī viharati. So Buddha explains that when one come across different kinds of feelings, so the yogi, the practitioner, should be able to understand how impermanent they are. They may not stay longer. They come and go. A happy feeling arises and after a while it passes away. A painful feeling arises and after a while it passes away. A neutral feeling also arises and after a while it passes away. So likewise, one understands its impermanent nature, its transient nature. And also, when one understands that, there could be possibility that it is not just a single unit of feeling, but it may be a collection of feelings. You should be able to, as our clear comprehension increases, probably we would be able to understand that it is a kind of a collection of feelings are there. Its resultant we perceived like a single feeling, but when we keep our attention very close to this feeling, we may be able to understand it is not just a single unit, rather it's a kind of a collection. It's a kind of an aggregate. So this collective result is what we have experienced. But as we examine it more closely, we may be able to understand it's a kind of a collection of different feelings are there. So each and every minute feeling is arising and passing away. Each and every minute feelings are arising and passing away. So this is in a way a very good experience where this is common to painful feelings as well as to pleasurable feelings, and again to neutral feelings. Irrespective of the type of feelings, so this picture is quite common. So all the pleasurable feelings appear like this. All the painful feelings appear like this. And the neutral feelings also appear like this. These are kind of a contribution, kind of a collection of many smaller minute feeling tones. Now, when one see this kind of a picture, more and more one becomes somewhat dispassionate towards these feelings. I mean, typically we have the nature, we encourage the pleasant feelings, we encourage pleasurable feelings, we want to have it, we want to own it, and we want to run away from painful feelings. But more and more we look at them objectively, more closely, with the correct view, then kind of a change happens in our mind. So now we are not going to grasp or cling to various pleasurable feelings and try to own these pleasurable feelings, because we understand they are quite transient. They won't stay longer. They are quite impermanent. So we simply are capable of looking at them as feelings. They come and go. Similarly, we are now quite capable of enduring certain painful feelings, because we understand they also come and go. We are not afraid of them. We have some patience. We have some endurance towards these painful feelings. And also we understand they are also quite transient. They are also impermanent. Now we are not afraid of them. Similarly, the neutral feelings. So as a result of this kind of an experience, when we do it again and again, there's a kind of a dispassion arising in our mind. So Buddha explained it as, so tasu vedanasu viraganupasse vihirati. So one can look at all these different kinds of feelings with a kind of a dispassion. We are not now trying to grasp them. We are not trying to hold them. We are not trying to consider them as me or mine. So this is quite important. And again one can see how they are passing away. They all arise, but they all pass away as well. Now one can see how they are passing away, how quickly they passes away. So now Buddha says, so tasu vedanasu nirodhanupassi vihirati, where one can see how quickly they disappear, how quickly they pass away. So more and more one would be, if one can do it, then those previous latent tendencies does not find its routine to operate. Now typically in order for these latent tendencies, raganusaya, patighanusaya, avijjanusaya to develop, then that routine has to run for a while. We can interpret like that. That routine has to run for a considerable period of time. Then only that routine gets strengthened. That habit gets strengthened. That underlying tendency gets strengthened. But more we look at these different kinds of feelings objectively, how transient they are, how impermanent they are, with a dispassionate view, then those latent tendencies doesn't find time to operate. As a result, they don't grow. They are not getting strengthened. Instead, now they become weakened because we are not contributing towards them. We are not strengthening them. We are not fertilizing them. As a result, they start to fade away. Different latent tendencies start to fade away. And especially this is mentioned in Madhupindika Sutta, where it is mentioned, when we stop this whole proliferation, when we are able to avoid sort of rumination, inner chatter, which we did some time back, then this whole nippapancha, this kind of a stillness, this quietude, this silence actually contributing towards the weakening of these latent tendencies. Yato nidanam bhikkhu purisang papancha sanya sankha samudacharanti ettache natti abhinaddi tabbam. So what is mentioned is that if one is able to avoid this inner chatter, this proliferation, this rumination, which we used to do, now one is sort of not interesting about that, not welcoming that, not going into that, then it actually paves the way to the fading away of the raganusaya, fading away of the underlying tendency of lust, fading away of the patighanusaya, fading away of the aversion, latent tendency towards the resistance or aversion, fading away of the latent tendency towards the ignorance, fading away of latent tendency of doubt and view, and again the conceit. So likewise, all the 7 types of anusaya, these latent tendencies are being sort of fading as a result of this kind of a practice. So therefore, going towards the source, that is the yoniso manasikara, and understanding how these are operating at its inception level, and not allowing to grow towards very high inner chatter or proliferation or rumination level, instead stopping it at its inception level, starting level, it's quite important. So therefore, typically the Vipassana yogi is expected to avoid proliferation as much as possible. Typically we like thinking. Typically we encourage thinking, and we are fond of proliferation, rumination. But as practitioners, we have to avoid that kind of proliferation or going into kind of obsessive thinking. More and more mind has to be silent. More and more our sort of inner quietude, inner stillness, inner silence has to be encouraged. Then only we would be able to see all these latent tendencies, recognize all these underlying tendencies, and then we would be able to honestly understand them, and then without encouraging them, to avoid strengthening them. So therefore, in this sutta, Buddha mentions Yatoko bhikkave bhikkhuno sukhaya vedanaya raganusayo pahino hoti. Now Buddha talks about a person, a practitioner, who has fulfilled this whole process. When someone is capable of avoiding contributing towards the raganusaya, towards the latent tendency of lust, when he go through pleasurable feelings. Similarly, when one is capable of avoiding contributing towards the latent tendency of aversion, even when he is going through painful feelings. And similarly, when one is capable of avoiding strengthening latent tendency towards ignorance, even when he is going through some neutral feelings. So this is, now you can understand a kind of a completely different phenomena. Previously we were promoting all these latent tendencies when we go through those experiences, those feelings. But now, as a result of the practice, one is not contributing towards the latent tendencies. Instead, he is able to fade them away. Pahino hoti. All these latent tendencies were sort of eroded or sort of faded away, or disappeared. And then Buddha explains further, Ayan miccati bhikkave bhikkhu niranusayo. Then that practitioner, that monk, or whoever the practitioner, that yogi is niranusayo. He is free from anusaya, free from this what you call the latent tendencies. And sammaddaso, and he is with proper understanding, he is with correct view. Achejji tanhan, he is able to cut off the craving. Vavattai sanyojanam, he has severed the fetters, he has weakened and eradicated the fetters. Sammamana abhisamaya, he has well penetrated the conceit. Antamakasi dukkassa, and he has made an end of suffering. Now, this is in a way the fruition of our practice, where when one is continuously practicing like as I have explained, so one is now not contributing our latent tendencies, not contributing various vicious cycles, not contributing various vicious thinking patterns. Rather, one is stilling oneself. One is sort of silencing oneself. One is in a way calming down oneself, not strengthening old inner kind of old previous habits. So now we are in a kind of a very good situation to understand ourselves, understand these latent tendencies, anusaya, and as a result one would be able to cut through craving, achejji tanham, cut through craving, and again would be able to gradually fade away all these latent tendencies, and vavattai sanyojanam. So we are able to sever the fetters. The fetters, because of the fetters we get hooked up with the external world, with the others, all the this and that. So we are now in a kind of a situation not to get hooked up, not to get caught up with various other external phenomena. And again one understand how all these are operating because of the conceit. So conceit also plays a big role, because mana anusaya is again a very subtle level of latent tendency, and such kind of understanding is very expecting a lot of practice, and more one becomes understanding how even the conceit is contributing towards latent tendencies. So more and more one avoids that kind of a comparison. Say when you come across some situation, you may be comparing yourself with another, your situation with another situation, present situation with another situation. So likewise we are compelled to compare. But now when one understands that this kind of a comparison is also contributing towards latent tendencies, then in a way we are very much attacking conceit as well. So this is extremely a subtle level of subtle defilement, and Buddha says if one is practicing, then one would be able to penetrate this conceit as well, and as a result one would be able to completely be free from suffering. So after informing like this, so this sutta gives several verses, very beautiful verses. So I'll go through quickly on these few verses. In this Pahana Sutta, Buddha mentions Sukhang Vedyamanassa Vedanang Appajanato. So Raganusayo Hoti Anissarana Dasino. Now this whole information which I have mentioned, now Buddha summarizes using several verses, where it says that when related to the pleasant feelings, if one is not knowing the latent tendency towards the lust, he is not actually know how to penetrate it, how to be free from these latent tendencies. In a way, he is strengthening the lust. Now, dukkhang vedyamanassa vedanang appajanato patigahanusayo hoti anissarana dassino. Now, on the other hand, when consider the painful feelings, if one doesn't know that it is contributing towards the what you call this aversion, or the latent tendency towards the aversion, then he doesn't know about the deliverance. Adukkama sukhang santang bhuri panyena desitang tangvapi abhinandanto neva dukkha pamucchati. Now Buddha taking a little more step here, even for the neutral feelings, which sometimes have praised by the Buddha. Even to those neutral feelings, if one attaches to, then Buddha says he doesn't know the deliverance. Because as you know, even if we attach to neutral feelings, then it may be contributing towards that ignorance, the latent tendency towards ignorance. Therefore, one should not even attach to these kind of pleasant neutral feelings. And then Buddha mentions the result if one practices well. Yatova bhikkhu atapi sampajanyang narinchati tatoso vedana sabba parijanati pandito. Yeah, Buddha says if one who is quite ardent and does not neglect clear comprehension, he is constantly have a good clear comprehension, sampajana, and who is quite mindful, and that wise one fully understands feelings in their entirety. So he is quite ardent as well as mindful and clearly sees what is happening. So as a result of his that kind of ardent practice, he would be able to understand feelings in their entirety. So Vedana Parinyaya Ditta Dhamme Anasavo Kayasa Bheda Dhammatto Sankhang no Peti Vedagu. Having fully understood feelings, he is taintless in this very life. Standing in Dhamma with the body's breakup, all measure and concept he has transcended. So this is how Buddha summarized the whole practice related to the, in a way, feelings. So ultimately telling that one is able to penetrate different latent tendencies, avoid latent tendencies, and quite establish in Dhamma. And when he is passing away, during his complete passing away, he actually is a kind of an arahant, where there is no remainder or there is no further birth for that person, because he has fully comprehended the feeling. If one fully comprehended the feeling and avoided all these latent tendencies and able to fade them away, then there is no further birth. So this is the, in a way, the fulfillment of the whole practice. So in this little sutta, therefore Buddha explains very beautifully about the whole practice in terms of Vedananupassana, in terms of how one can look at various feelings and using that understanding towards the final goal. So with that information, I like to conclude today's Dhamma sermon. Thank you very much for participation. Thank you very much for listening.